gentlemen, welcome. Usually for people who come to Business Inside the Game, we usually kicking this off with some music. We're in a festive situation, like All Star, around the ESPYs, things like that. But due to recent, global, this global pandemic, and also, these uprisings, we decided to, bring our town hall and our Business Inside the Game Summit to you virtually. I'm your host, Baron Davis, and I built Business Inside the Game as a platform to allow entrepreneurs, hyphenate actors, actresses, athletes, investors, an opportunity to be the part, look the part, invest in each other, and use our community as an opportunity to, help entrepreneurs skip the line, but also help investors start to lead and invest with purpose. For me, it's an honor to be doing this. As you see, I don't want to talk too long, but I want to get right into it. We have 4 panelists, and we were talking a little bit before this. For me, we've been talking about, putting your money where your mouth is. And that's the topic of today's discussion. And, each one of these individuals, I've had the honor to, sit face to face and talk about how do we move the needle economically? How do we invest in the right entrepreneurs, right? How do we take leadership to the next level? And as we've seen, with the protests, as we've seen with, various different people standing out, talking about various different issues, we wanted to really come together and talk about how can we start to move the needle economically to advance our culture, right? To build a better institution for ourselves and create a better value system. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests. Forgive me that we don't have music, but I like to make basketball references. So starting at point guard, she is a VP, client advisor at JP Morgan. I like to say she's a point guard as far as initiating clients to their level of success, finding out their DNA, how to financially, provide not only for her culture, but, for her clients, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Chelsea Crowder.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
Next up is a good buddy of mine, Covariance Capital Director. Carlos is a good buddy of mine, a mentor. I've met over 6 years ago, and we sat down for a 45-minute lunch that turned into a 3-hour lunch. And we really talked about, the African-American and the Latinos' role in, establishing an economic ecosystem. And, I'm happy to have him to share his knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, Carlos Castro.
Thanks for having me.
Next up is my brother from another mother. He is a guy who, when I first started Business Inside the Game, he stepped up to the plate and, sponsored it and really helped me kind of craft the vision of what I wanted this platform to be. Somesh Dash is a general partner at IVP. He's taught me investing, how to do due diligence on companies. But more importantly, we've shared, we talk about social issues, right? We talk about social economic issues, and more importantly, how to advance the minority and the immigrants economic pathway. So, ladies and gentlemen, a good friend of mine, Somesh Dash from IVP.
Thanks, Baron. Thank you.
And last but not least, this man is my big brother. I wish I looked more like him. But I mean, I had to say that joke. But I wish I was, as I would say our friendship is going on well over 20 years. When I met him, I was a young kid pursuing basketball, and saw him as an actor, and really became a mentor, a big brother, an advisor. I've watched him build not only his brand but his community, his family. You're only as good as the people that you surround yourself with, and I've been happy to be a part of his inner circle. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who really doesn't need an introduction, Boris Kodjoe.
What's up, everybody? Glad to be here.
So Boris, let's just kick this off. I want to start with you. Let's talk about what industries are you looking at as far as like an investor? Give us a little bit of background about how did you become the investor and the leader that you are today.
Well, I think that building a career in Hollywood requires a lot of resilience, and you sort of jump from failure to failure to finally get to a place where you can look back and say, okay, there has been some successes. What's important to me now is, number one, that I'm able to choose the people I work with. I think that's a luxury in any sector. I like to surround myself with people who are an inspiration to me, who empower me, who are smarter than me. And I look for three things. Number one is it's got to be commercially viable so I can continue to do it. Number two, there has to be some sense of a creative outlet for me to feed my spirit. And number three, most importantly, there has to be a purpose beyond just myself. So I have to be able to open doors for others, empower others, inspire, and create sustainable economic development within what I'm doing. So those are the most important things to me. I don't really look at specific things. I talk to people. I invest in people. I invest in people's dreams. I invest in people's goals. And lately, in the past 3 years, I have focused a great deal on the continent. So I've had the opportunity to be in Ghana many times. My father's from there, and we have started looking around and engaging with small to medium enterprises in Ghana and in other countries in West Africa. It all starts with igniting the excitement and the interest of people in the diaspora about Africa, and then to sort of create a new narrative in Africa. Because, traditionally Western news outlets have painted Africa in a very one-dimensional way. It's always about famine and war and poverty. And Africa is a continent with the youngest population in the world. It's got all the natural resources you could possibly wish for. It's got so much potential and a newfound energy about it that we have looked to Africa a lot in terms of new investments.
That's awesome. And then can you talk about, I may mess this up, Nyansapo? Nyansapo. Can you talk a little bit about Nyansapo and the focus, on, creating, wealth in Africa and a pathway from, U.S. to Africa?
Nyansapo was founded by my partner Dana Reed and myself, and it focuses on a variety of things on the continent, especially starting with an initiative or an event that we started 3 years ago called Full Circle Festival, which I invited you to. twice already, but you never came.
I'm
That's your fault.
supposed to come this year.
And Full Circle Festival was an initiative to change the narrative. It was an opportunity to create sustainable economic development on the continent by way of engaging with Africans rather than investing and then pulling all the money out, which has been the tradition, especially for European companies who are in the business of exploiting the continent rather than investing.
Yeah.
So we wanted to change the game, and again, the potential is huge. Whether it's infrastructure, manufacturing, agriculture, there's gold everywhere. Africa needs shipping routes. There's so much tech. The tech industry is huge in Africa. So across various sectors, it was exciting for us to engage with people. Listen to them, engage with them, learn, and then make investment choices.
That's awesome. Carlos, can you piggyback off that? You've had, a great career as an investor, looking at, from a global economic standpoint. Can you weigh in on, your thoughts on, the minority, and, also how do you see, how do we really build structure for the minority to be economically successful?
Yeah, and I'll try to be as concise and linear as I can, because this is actually a massive issue that's systemic in nature. But if you look at what created Silicon Valley, what's created Silicon Alley in New York, what's created Boston's VC community, and even Austin and some of the other places like Denver, there's an ecosystem that sustains itself and allows for really, really rich opportunities to invest. And the majority of those tend to be tech by nature and massively scalable. And there's a reason why those cities have that. And it's Stanford, it's Berkeley, it's Columbia University, it's all of the schools in Boston, Harvard, MIT, and other cities just don't have that. So there's a reason why Houston doesn't have a VC community that's robust. Atlanta does not have a robust VC community. However, what it does have is private equity opportunities. And I think as an investor, we have to take a step back and say, and I'll get back to the systemic issue of it, but a good business is a good business regardless. And as a fiduciary of managing close to $3 billion for our organization, we're fiduciaries to that money because it benefits our stakeholders. Now, we have the ability and the right to look for opportunities that can do the greater good while achieving financial returns. So we've been able to make venture returns on some very unsexy businesses, such as a whiteboard company or pipes, industrials, an elevator company. Very unsexy businesses, but make venture returns. Not everything has to be Google, Facebook, Twitter, right? And I think to get back to the systemic part of it is who gets those opportunities to join those first 50 employees at a Google or at a Pinterest, at a, name your unicorn. And it's folks that have lived and somewhat have been exposed to that ecosystem, and it goes back to pre-high school, right? These folks that tend to be Caucasian, blue blood, have been groomed for that and positioned to go to a Stanford University, a Harvard. And that ecosystem is very, very much feeding itself, right? So for me to get to where I am, I'm an immigrant, originally from Nicaragua. By default, I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school, the first person in my family to go to college, the first person in my family to get an Ivy League MBA, right? But in order for that to work, a massive amount of luck had to happen. And it was Caucasian individuals, teachers, mentors, that said, this person has a lot of horsepower. If you point that person in the right direction and give it the right infrastructure, that person can then pay it forward. And organizations like that exist, like Management Leadership for Tomorrow or the Consortium for Graduate Studies. But the ecosystem itself needs still more work. So Boris, you said some things that a business one has to be viable, but you're also investing in people. And I think at the root of this, when I look at myself in the mirror and say, am I one, I can invest a lot of money so people take my calls and meetings. So this means nothing. The green that I represent means everything. And I say I need to be the best investor, the best representative there. My last name and my features will speak for themselves, but I still need to be the best in the room. And I carry myself, or I try, and I work at that to represent that way. But the mentorship component has to be there. Every year, my goal is to send at least X amount of people to an Ivy League school through mentorship, through pointing them in the right direction. But it really starts so much sooner than that. It's, I mean, again, and I'll stop because I'm being long-winded, but imagine all of the kids growing up in single-parent households. A lot of single moms are just trying to do their best. And if you can really start at that part of the equation with helping that part of the community, I do think you get a step closer, because the output, the end result of joining a Facebook, joining a Google when it's on that ascend, it didn't happen there. It didn't happen right before that. It happened decades before. And that's where I go back to, this is a systemic issue that just needs a lot of horsepower and a lot of bright minds at the table, and a lot of influencers that say, okay, I take it upon myself. I've made it, or close to making it, or can make it, but can I bring other people along to do the same?
That's awesome. And Chelsea, I think, that feels like, your name starts ringing when, Carlos is talking about, minorities creating that change, right? Getting into the system, paying it back, paying it forward, right? As a Black female, talk about your pathway. Like, why did you choose to, pioneer in this direction, and a little bit about your background, because I think it would speak to, our audience as far as like, reaching, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So many of the things that both Boris and Carlos have said have really resonated with me. One, being the product of a single parent household. I was born in Oakland, California. I grew up in Sacramento. I had never heard of Wall Street. That wasn't something that I was familiar with. And then I went to Columbia University for school, and I was in New York City. And my mom said one thing to me and my sister both when we left for school, which was that we needed to figure out what we were going to do and never come home. And my mom is one of my best friends. I love her to death, but she was just like, I don't want you to think that that's an option for you. My sister ended up pursuing her PhD at Princeton and is going to be a professor here at Loyola Marymount. And I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm an engineer. I'm mathy. I'm quantitative. And I saw these financial firms coming to campus, and all of my white male peers, they were already with their suits and their resume folders, and they knew what to do. And so I was really just kind of following course and hoping that something would speak to me. And I saw a few Black professionals that had pursued careers in finance. And I was like, okay, this seems like something that I think that I can do. And at least I want to learn more. And then being on the trading floor, which is where I started my career, and seeing the massive sums of institutional capital that are going into companies and really fueling the economy. It's interesting. People say the economy and the markets and kind of use those terms interchangeably, which is not the same. But why do some people have access to capital? Some communities have access to capital and others don't. And knowing that while I might be one of very few people who looks like me sitting in this seat, the ability to be at the table and a part of the conversation and figure out how the disparity in terms of outcomes for communities of people has become so wide, how the racial inequality gap has become so wide. Why is it that unemployment for the Black population has always been so much higher than for the rest of the country? Why is it that we've seen during this current moment a decrease in Black-owned businesses and businesses owned by members of the Latinx community that far outpaces that of our white peers? And how can I be a catalyst for change there? And to your point, Carlos, a lot of it had to do with having mentors, people who saw something in me and were willing to have that conversation after the market closed, were willing to advise me and teach me and give me books. So that I could teach myself. I think that was an essential component of it.
That's awesome. And then I definitely want you to talk about now being at, JP Morgan, right? Like the initiatives that you're championing, kind of looking at where we are with this opportunity of change. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that really excited me about JP Morgan, and I don't even want this to come off as like, I work at JP Morgan, so of course I'm going to say this, but like when I worked at another firm, this was something that I looked to as like, wow, I've never seen anything like that. There are lots of firms that have diversity initiatives, and it's easy enough to have a panel of diverse people where you have someone who has a disability and someone who's a woman, someone from the LGBTQIA community, and you have this diverse panel of white people. And people are sometimes hesitant to put a name on the community that is really being focused. The Advancing Black Pathways program at JP Morgan is one that has deliberately targeted the Black community across 3 pillars: careers, education, and wealth. I'm a private banker. I work with wealthy families every single day. And for me to be able to have a targeted focus on working with families who look like me, who are serving the communities that I hope to serve, is really meaningful. And to be supported from the most senior levels of leadership at the firm to do that and to be empowered that way is super meaningful. Education, partnering with historically Black colleges and universities across the country, a commitment to bring in 4,000 students as interns and ultimately full-time employees. And careers, specifically working internally, making sure that Black folks in the organization are promoted and in positions where they're going to excel. So that's something that I'm definitely super excited about. The Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, which is a loan facility that started in Detroit and has expanded across the country, specifically focused on small businesses, is something that I think is crucial and integral. And I think just kind of looking at some of the stats that I was speaking to earlier, a 41% decrease in Black-owned businesses from February to April, just over the course of this pandemic, how important that catalytic capital is going to be. And so, appreciate you guys on the call who are also on the ground investing in these businesses with these founders and supporting businesses in the communities that really need it.
Thank you, Chelsea. Somesh, in 2013, you wrote an article in the Business Insider, right, about 3 facts that prove that America needs more immigrants, right? You've been, an incredible investor, but also a huge champion for, the immigrants' journey, and then also building the minorities' journey in Silicon Valley. Can you just give us a little background of your journey, and then just speak to, what you've been able to do at IVP and with some of your portfolio companies that you've invested in?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. I think I'll start where you hit it, BD, which is immigration. I'm the son of 2 immigrants, first generation, came from India. My father's family grew up in agrarian, the poorest part of India, basically as close to that, the bottom, as scarce as resources can be, no running water, electricity, those kinds of things. And I just was lucky that I had this interesting juxtaposition, which you and I have talked about, Baron. I grew up in Silicon Valley, which had some of the greatest growth opportunities for anybody from around the world in the 80s and 90s. But I also go back to India every summer to see my cousins who didn't have electricity and were getting malaria and stuff like that we just don't even talk about in our kind of affluent societies in the United States. And so I always had this commitment from my parents to give back, because it was just really a lot of luck and chance that I was here with these opportunities, but my cousins were back there stuck, right? And that's where a lot of my motivation came from. you know, as Carlos said, a lot of the great companies that we've invested in Silicon Valley, whether it's companies like, you know, Google and Tesla, we didn't invest in those, we wish we did. But, you know, a lot of the great ones that we've been a part of were founded by immigrants. And so in 2011, when I started seeing there was a push to get away from that heritage of what created this ecosystem, I got involved with former Mayor Bloomberg's initiatives around immigration. And there's a lot of analogies actually to kind of where we are now. Immigration was the topic in 2011. Everybody rallied around it. Everybody said this is important. This is, you know, how could you not support this? And then, you know, people got their pictures taken, people got the headlines, and then it sort of stopped being of interest. And that's sort of my biggest concern with any political momentum is that a certain period goes by and then people move on. I don't think that's going to happen this time, but I do fear that unless there's political action at scale and policy changes, a lot of this stuff goes away. What happened to immigration was we ended up electing somebody in the White House that doesn't, with his rhetoric or policy, believe that we should have the best and brightest come here anymore. A lot of my work is helping this morning write letters to the Immigration and Naturalization Services to keep engineers who have PhDs in this country versus going back to their home countries and starting the next Google and Facebook there. And I think that's just silly. They should staple the visa to the diploma when someone, you know, graduates from some of our best institutions here. You know, we're managing about $5 billion. We're investors in companies like Brex and Discord and Twitter and Snap, which you and I have spent a decade getting to know. And yet I think we're in this amazing moment where people realize that the venture ecosystem has not done enough to put words into action in terms of supporting women, minorities, LGBTQ members for getting those same opportunities that many of us had. And I think, you know, one of the, just I'll leave you with one interesting fact that we should talk about is, you know, in the midst of everything that happened last week, the government announced quietly the same day that the protests were happening in DC that now your 401k and IRS, your 401ks and retirement accounts can be invested in private equity. So there's $10 trillion in the United States every year in 401ks and retirement accounts, your IRA Roth accounts. And even if 5% is put in private equity, that's $500 billion. Why isn't the conversation more about getting people from brown and black backgrounds to even know what a 401k is, to understand what retirement planning is? Why not giving those products to be made available to them? Why don't we create tax incentives so firms like mine can actually invest in minority-owned businesses? That's how the venture business grew. Pension funds, long-term capital gains tax, QSBS, there's all this stuff that's in there. And yet, unless there's policy change, I'm fearful that this is going to lose its momentum. Don't get me started. I have a lot to say on this. So.
No. I mean, this is the reason for this. You know, I feel like everybody is emotionally charged, right? Everybody has this energy, and you know, you can feel the people wanting to, you know, be free, right? And so my question is, you know, do you think that there's going to be an increase in investments in black and brown and minority businesses? And then Boris, I'd love for you to pick that up and then talk about, you know, how do we rewrite the narrative, right? And then Carlos and Chelsea, how do we fund that narrative, right? And so just to kind of let you guys just kind of have the floor and just move into, you know, like, let's figure out if we can actually create the situation and solve the problem here.
Well, I'll kick off, and then Boris, Chelsea, Carlos, you guys should jump in. I do think, you know, BD, you and I have talked about this for over a decade. I do think that there is real change happening in terms of people's attitudes. I think this is one of those unique moments where we have the combination of the trifecta, which is a global health pandemic, economic volatility, and a crisis in terms of race relations like we haven't seen in some ways since the civil rights movement. The thing that gives me hope and optimism is the next generation. I think in talking to the young people today, you don't need to explain it to them to get it. They've opened their minds and their hearts up to this idea that the future shouldn't look like the past. And I think for the older generation, many of them also have finally a recognition that things need to change.
Yep.
The reason I'm so optimistic also is I think the reality is diversity and inclusion were topics that were already top of mind, but now like those of us that are pushing hard to see the change are empowered to be those that are in power in those seats that can actually catalyze it. We weren't in those positions 10, 20, 40 years ago. The other thing that I'm just really personally excited by is it comes down to the entrepreneurs. And when I see the way like we're investors in Slack, and you look at the way Stuart is thinking about designing Slack, or we're friends with Eric at Zoom, and what Zoom has done, you know, in their own capacity as a for-profit company is mind-boggling. They've woken up to the opportunities from remote learning, education, all these different applications, where I think we need to hold ourselves accountable, though, is we need public databases to talk about what are people putting their money in. Because unless there's accountability and people talk about this stuff, you know, you can get away with bad behavior. And I think LPs, our investors, just to give people background, our money comes from foundations, endowments, family offices like the ones Chelsea manages. And I think we've made it a point to say we got to change up even the way we think about that. We want the HBCUs not just to give us money, but to give us time to help them, to be on their endowment committees, to help them with asset selection. So this is a whole rethinking of the way venture capital works, and that's starting to really take place by the next generation of leadership. So I couldn't be more excited by that, but we have to measure it by decades. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not about using social media to make a statement to get props. It's about systematic change that you can measure through data.
Yeah, Boris, could you piggyback on that?
Yeah.
You know, that needs to be articulated, correct?
Yeah. I love what you said, Somesh. And what I wanted to speak to is that we're in a very, very special moment in time right now in our history, something that I've never experienced in my lifetime. And even though the pandemic has been a huge challenge on numerous levels, I think that without it, I doubt we would have been in the same position in terms of the movement, because people have been cooped up in their houses across the globe. Their emotions haven't had an outlet. So when I think it all started with, weirdly enough, with the phone call that Amy Cooper made, and it sort of culminated in the terrible murder that we all witnessed of George Floyd, because people for the first time, especially white people, connected the dots between her making a phone call and basically weaponizing this phone call that could potentially lead to something which we then saw days later. I think it struck everybody really hard, and it caused white people to be reminded of their accountability. I think, you know, the systemic racism here in this country that's been going on for hundreds of years has had an effect on us by way of victimizing us, but it's had an effect on white people where people were quickly to turn their back and sort of sit comfortably in their luxury of oblivion, right? Because they didn't feel it affected them. I think what we've seen in the past week globally, with white and black and all kinds of different colors on the street protesting, has given me hope that this is a pivotal point that we have to take advantage of if we want to, like what Chelsea said, if we want to close the generational wealth gap that was established, again, hundreds of years ago through slavery and later on through the prison industrial complex. I think there's two things that are very important. Accountability. We have to keep people accountable and remind them of their role and their part in changing history right now, especially white people. And number two, we have to confront our own temptation with validation. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes as Black people, we're seeking validation, especially in the financial community. We're seeking validation in synergies and partnerships with white companies. with white institutions, rather than turning to our own. And I spoke to that in one of the African summits that we did in Ghana, that for some reason we're still seeking the validation of white people. And we cannot imagine sometimes that we are really all that we need. There's nobody or nothing else we need.
Right.
We are everything. We are everything we need. We have all the resources we need. All we have to do is what we've been doing for the past 2 weeks, is coming together with a mutual and collective goal in mind, creating synergies and collaborations, and then producing results. So those are the two things that come to mind that are so important in order to produce a sustainable impact over the next weeks, months, and years. And in terms of accountability, we have to call out institutional and private equity money, white institutional and private equity money. We have to call people out and say, look, you are benefiting from hundreds of years of systemic mechanisms that have been put in place for you to win and for us to lose. So now it's time for you to step up in a real way, because at the end of the day, if you want to run a successful business, we have to be a part of that.
Right.
I see all these companies coming out of the woodworks now and making these donations to various Black organizations on the street, and I have to laugh. And people think I'm ungrateful, but I have to laugh because the monies that they're donating, that's literally barely petty cash, right? And those are multi-international. Those are companies that are making, 9 figures on our backs. Literally, Black people generating tens of billions of dollars for these companies, and they turn around and write a $10 million check. And I think it's laughable. So again, it's up to us. 2 things. We got to hold them accountable in order to infuse some real cash into community-based organizations. And also, we have to stand the temptation of trying to seek validation somewhere where we're not loved. Those are my 2.
I love that. I love that. Before Carlos, I just want to piggyback off that, because I preach the same thing, is that we have to create value within ourselves, right? As a community, as an ecosystem, we have to pool our resources to now start to value the companies, the entrepreneurs, the foundations, right? And not so much look for the opportunity to be Black privilege. You know what I mean? So,
and not to jump in, because I know, Carlos, you were about to, but in that, creating value, I also think it's, to Boris's point, realizing that we've created the value, and we kind of always have, but It's just a matter of us actually having an ownership stake and being able to capture the value. And I mean, I've seen the Full Circle Festival and what you've been able to do with that platform and bringing people to the continent and allowing them to see the value that's been there. When you think about Black culture and it being synonymous with American culture here, all the value that we created for this country, and understanding that we need equity, we need ownership, and we need to be able to be participating in the upside and in what we're creating, because we've actually already created it.
Right.
Yeah, it's sorry. I want to jump in there quick, because you said it so eloquently, Chelsea. It's almost like we've been dying to get a seat at the table, but we've been the table. So why are we still struggling to get a seat at the table? We are the table.
Right.
We are our own asset. We are our own value. All we need to do is reclaim it, or claim it, redefine it, if you will. Whether you're looking at, like you said, our culture, you're talking about music, fashion, they're copying us. They're stealing our IP. Why don't we claim our own IP, our own assets, and build on that?
Yeah, Carlos, jump in here, man.
How
do we own this, right? How do we own it? Like,
so I see, I don't have a crystal ball or I don't have the solutions, but if I think about a thesis or a hypothesis, here's one, and it looks like a barbell. There's as Somesh said, there's what takes decades, and then what can happen now. The easy one is now. Folks like myself become a CIO at an institution, and I have the ability to night where the money goes. And that is the simple now solution, as Boris is kind of driving to the point. How do you own it or reclaim it? Well, people of color become the decision makers, and they're the ones that can night green light projects or green light capital to reclaim the product, right? And then and that's hard to do, because for every one of me, and I'm not there yet, right? I've been able to sponsor a night the two Black-owned private equity funds, Frank Baker's Sears Capital and Robert Smith's Vista, right? Those are good businesses regardless if they were purple or lime green. They're just monsters and geniuses at making money. But it took someone like me saying we should take a look at them and night them with capital. So it takes that happens in the now, and that is a solution. I think the one with the greatest impact and the bigger ripple effects, and the one that's more organic and sustainable is to Somesh's point, it's for the hundreds of companies in IVP's portfolio, can we get high school programs in engineering, college programs in engineering or marketing or design or business development, anything. And it doesn't have to just be from the small minorities, again, at the Ivy Leagues. It could be universities that have a ton of horsepower in guys and girls that grew up in those single family households or were first generation or whatever. Those are the University of Houston's, the Rutgers, the FAMU's, the universities that are not, Wall Street has been picking the elite at Morehouse for a while now, right? Expand on that. Go down to the state school, to the name your state university. That's where that happens. And again, it takes a Slack or a Twitter and again, to be linear, it goes from that portfolio company that ends up becoming a unicorn. Take a step back and you have the IVPs, the Founders Fund, the Coastal Ventures of the world. Take a step back, you have the pensions, the endowments, the foundations, the limited partners, and everyone in that chain needs to have alignment. And that alignment is usually financial because we're all rewarded by money, right? And let that be aligned to passion and purpose and mission. And I think when you can achieve that in the dots, you connect all the dots. Now you have a narrative, now you have a movie, now you have a story. But there's the now, and what can we do now? And now is putting decision makers of color in those seats. And then there's the decades of how do you unwind systemic issues and advance that, because what this country will be is a big melting pot. My daughter is a mixed race, half white child that will grow up in a world that will look very similar to her. And she needs to understand, and all of us, because we are going to be more melting pot than not as the decades go on.
BD, one thing on that Carlos saying, though, we can't have a conversation about race and business that without talking about class and power. Because I think one of the things that I've realized is for too long, there's been this orientation that social entrepreneurs, people from non-traditional backgrounds need to be mentored by people that come from traditional backgrounds, who go to Ivy League schools or work at certain firms. Why? The reality is, I think if every venture capitalist or private equity or professional themselves got mentored by one strong woman from a non-traditional background or a minority who did not have these accesses and privileges that they had, that would be the catalyst for the change. Because I think the power dynamic is such that, you and I have talked about this for a decade. When when athletes are retiring and they come to Silicon Valley to the tour, and they're sort of like, oh, advise me with what I do. My orientation is always, you could actually help the entrepreneur as much as they can help you. And so it should be a symbiotic relationship, a nurturing together of coming up. It shouldn't be that people with the dollars automatically are assumed to be geniuses and have this power. And that's kind of what I really love what Boris said is, if we get out of our own heads, if we kind of if we realize that we have the power, we have the ability to make that change if we just stick together. And sure, like, it'd be wonderful to be asked to serve on some powerful board, but I'd rather be mentored by a young kid who's seeing the world a different lens, who could be the next Malala, and tell me about how I'm running my business the wrong way. That's humility. And if it comes from within, that's how change happens.
Yeah, I think that's business inside the game. Shout out to business inside the game for, and you guys for participating and being a part of this. I think that, one, it's like when you look at, just this group right here, I'm looking at, okay, here's a solution, right? Right? How do we, connect the dots, right? To, even if it's a diagram or a playbook, right? What parts can, you guys play in your industry, right? And then what can you ask of people in your industry to be a part of, I guess, this playbook, right? Or this script, as you would say. So Chelsea, if you want to take a stab at that,
Yeah.
you plan.
I was having a conversation with one of my girlfriends earlier today, and we were talking about how there were people who mentored us, and we feel a responsibility to do that because they did it for us. I think continuing to do that, when I see a young Black person who's coming to the firm, who's interested in my career trajectory or trying to navigate the nuances of corporate America, being a resource to them. I think it's also, so many of us who occupy predominantly white spaces feel this undue burden to educate people and to be that representative voice, but empowering people to educate themselves, to read books, to Google, to utilize the resources that are at their fingertips to allow them to have the vocabulary to have a conversation to engage with you. When it comes to a conversation about markets, when it comes to a conversation about investing, the expectation is that I come to the table prepared. And I think that we should flip that expectation on its head. And when it comes to having conversations about race, diversity, and inclusion, ensuring that our counterparts are prepared to have those conversations with us. And I also think that we need to continue to patronize the Black-owned businesses that we know about, to support them, to amplify their voices, because small business is the engine to growth and creation and closing that racial disparity in terms of wealth and income over time. Those are the people that are giving jobs to people in the community, empowering people to build businesses of their own. And we need to make sure that we're amplifying those voices and those platforms as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Boris.
I'm aware of the position I'm in this sort of ecosystem of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. I believe that storytellers shape our culture. I believe that we shape our narrative. Mm-hmm. And I think that conversations like these help inform people's consciousness, especially in moments like these, when we're on the street every day protesting for our rights and for social justice and equality. I think these moments are very important. It's what I found very curious in these past 2 weeks. I talked to one of my mentors, and he spoke about the 60s, the civil rights movement, and the parallels between the 60s and today. And he was talking about how music and how artists shaped the way that the civil rights movement was sort of transported into the world, because they didn't have social media. There was no internet, right? Where are those artists right now? Where are those musicians? I haven't heard anybody, especially in our culture, who has sort of taken a baton and started running with it. Mm-hmm. And I try to ask myself why that is, and I think it speaks to an issue, a challenge that we're facing, where our millennials and young people have been so desensitized by what they've seen, by way of being sort of bombarded with social media every single day of their life, that I think it stuns the awareness of our collective responsibility and our purpose. And I think that we are the ones who have to call each other out and hold each other accountable in this moment, so that we can be a force on a consistent basis. And because, look, I know that there's going to be large sums of money and a lot of assets that are going to be dispersed and distributed to Black-owned companies, organizations, in sort of this, after this groundswell that's happening now. We have to be ready, all right? We have to be ready to be able to take that money and turn it into, like what Chelsea said, to make sure that we support small and medium-sized enterprises in our communities. We cannot drop the ball. So again, we have to hold each other accountable. We have to be awake, and we have to be ready to take the ball and run with it.
Somesh, what's the playbook? If you can write the playbook for what you're doing in venture and as an investor, what would that look like? And what would you ask of your friends in that space?
Well, I think there's a good analogy. So about 100 years ago, a man went to Africa, to South Africa, to practice law. And when he was entering into near Johannesburg, he was brutally beaten by the police because of the color of his skin. And that man was Mahatma Gandhi. And so what was the unknown story of Mahatma Gandhi, though, which is so interesting, is that before he went to India and got independence for 1 billion Indians, he actually fought for the rights of the Zulus in South Africa, and actually created the first set of first responders that actually protected them from the British Imperial Army. I bring that up because this fight is going to be successful at scale if there's alliances, if there's people joining forces together. It can't just be the Black community feeling like, okay, we got to support Black people. The brown community saying we got to support brown people. You know, people from certain universities saying this is my alma mater, I don't really care about because I don't go somewhere else. It's got to be a sense of justice that comes from within, that it's actually a bigger thing for me now to take care of those who don't have that voice, even if I'm not from that community, because this is just the right thing to do from a karmic standpoint, you know. And that's what I think a lot of people in the buy side of venture and private equity are coming to, which is people have been huge beneficiaries of amazing confluences of variables in the last 4 to 5 decades in America. But, you know, one personal story, I remember when I was 7 years old, I did the census in California. You probably remember these, BD, where you have to fill out, who you are. And I was told at home I'm an Indian kid, and I look at the census and there's no such thing. There's just Asian, and I'm like, well, I'm not really Asian. I mean, India is a part of Asia as a continent, but is that? And so I checked the other box, and it's one of those things where I was telling my kids, like, I always felt like the other, right? No matter what room you're in, if you can take that feeling of feeling like you're the other, and remember what that feels like for someone else and help them fight that fight. You know, I always joke that Trading Places was my favorite movie growing up. And I've kind of trained myself to talk like Dan Aykroyd, but the inner monologue's all Eddie Murphy, right? And so we don't need to keep that inner inside anymore. I think we can all be a little more outward about how we really think in these situations, and there'll be less injustice. What I am seeing happen in the venture business is people are serious about time and money going towards the right causes. We as a partnership have decided to support publicly, not just the NAACP and ACLU, but also the Innocence Project, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Equal Justice Initiative that Brian Stevenson started. But more importantly, it's the new nonprofits that get started in this cohort that are really going to make a difference. Because I think, like Boris said, there's a lot. Handling the money is going to be a non-trivial challenge for these nonprofits. But what opportunities get created for the next 10 to 20 years, that's the group that we want to fund and back and meet them. So if anybody on the call has got nonprofit ideas, like, hit us up. Like, we want an audience. We want to learn how we can be helpful. And then frankly, just what you do, BD, connecting people in these kinds of conversations when everyone's at home and people really want to do something of impact. Actually, just having these kinds of talks makes you grow from an aptitude standpoint so much. that we're all healing, we're all learning. I think people are coming from it from the right place, from not just philanthropy is always head and heart together.
Yeah.
And so I think what I would say is, let's not lose this moment. Let's capture this and also be honest. Like, I wish I had done more 10 years ago in my career to support minority entrepreneurs. I'm guilty for not doing more. And I'm going to carry that guilt for the rest of my life, but I don't want to live like that anymore.
I love that. I love that. Carlos, please.
Yeah, look, I think everybody said really, really good things, and I won't. I'll just echo it, and I'll add two things. One is a story that's near and dear to my heart. I was a sophomore in college, and I was at a career fair. Fish out of water, really didn't know much. I just had good grades. I was blessed that I could get good grades, and I show up. Let's say to some extent, you're always a product of your environment, but I had a taper fade, a baggy shirt, baggy khakis, and Timberlands. And this gentleman pulls me to the side, and he says, and he was a Hispanic, very successful man, and he says, "Hey, listen, you have a manila envelope, which I assume has a very crappy resume in it. Just take a look around. Who else here looks like you, is dressed like you?" And everyone was a nice, 20-something-year-old suit and tie, looked professional. No one looked like me. Mm-hmm. And he said, I want to make sure you can understand this, because at some part of the playing field, everyone has a strong IQ. And that's just entry to the game, right? It's then it turns into, do people want to do business with you, right? And I found that individual 10 years later at a gala, and I said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I wanted to say thank you for what you told me," because it pissed me off when he told me, because I felt insulted, and I want to keep it real and authentic to myself and blah, blah, blah. But it was so true. It was the absolute truth. And I could celebrate my cultures and the cultures of America, and I don't have to, I can be a chameleon, right? And always keep that true. But to extrapolate that point further, and Somesh, what you said, I think that the wave of what will happen may not necessarily happen in the now, which is, a mandate from my firm to invest in minority-owned business. I don't think that's near term at all, unfortunately. However, I do think that the ripple effect and what can take, 5 to 10 to 15 years is the nonprofit work, the folks that were really wearing their heart on their sleeve and saying, "I'm passionate about something." And it could be as small as, Baron, whenever you hold your next basketball tournament, instead of Reebok or whoever sponsoring signs, why shouldn't it be a JP Morgan or my firm? And as for one Baron Davis that mastered the skill and art and was blessed to play professional basketball, Baron, how many people in your friend circle and in the basketball camps that you attended did not make it pro, right? But those people were gifted and talented and had the ability to put in hard work. But what if they hear someone like me or Chelsea or Somesh or Boris talk about something that, look, if you don't make it pro, which chances are only one of you folks in this gym are, you could do something else. And you just don't know what that is, because, as Chelsea said, you didn't know what Wall Street was. I didn't know what Wall Street was until after college, really. And then I said, oh, this is what Goldman Sachs does. This is, I wasn't exposed to the world of venture capital until later in my career. But it's just, as simple as systemic education and exposure. If at 7 years old I would have known what Silicon Valley was, I may have done something different and faster with my career, right? It's identifying horsepower and young talent and nurturing that as much as possible. And with these organizations that are going to come and be championed, it's really allowing them to cast a wide net and capture as many hearts and minds as possible to slowly unwind what is systemic in our country.
And I think also, just for any young people watching this that are figuring out where you want to be and what you want to do and what you want your impact in the world to be, don't think that it requires you to put on a suit and tie. I am a dark-skinned Black woman with a shaved head, and I work on Wall Street. And I know that means that there are some rooms that are not going to necessarily be receptive to me. I want to work with people who want to work with me. Your Jordans or your Tims are not who you are, but by no means feel that you cannot bring your full self to what it is that you do, because that's your value. And I just wanted to say that. I think that's important.
I was going to ask you guys to give a little motivation and business inside the game advice. So thank you, Chelsea. Boris, can you, give our audience some, just your business inside the game, snacks?
What I would say is, especially to young people out there, you've been seduced by your timelines on Instagram and Twitter. And only you can define your journey. Only you will make decisions that are right for you. So write your own script. Walk the journey at your own pace. Don't look right. Don't look left at what other people are doing, because mostly the stuff on IG is usually fake anyway. Right. So try to ignore that. Don't add any extra pressure on you. You're perfect the way you are. Don't be discouraged by all the stuff that you see right and left. And just focus on trying to find your purpose. I think that should be the goal. And once you find your purpose, everything will fall into place.
Love it. Carlos.
I mean, I'll keep it short and sweet. There's really no substitute for hard work ever, right? And there's no, and Boris, you're absolutely right. The IG life and the other, and I think I won't say what I'd like to, but the effect that, let's say, a certain cultural family has had on culture period is my opinion terrible, because there is this desire for this quick fame, this quick life, this quick riches and glamour and all this, and that is so not true. I mean, the 10,000 hour rule is true for a reason. I'm sure everyone here, Barrett included, for every party you missed out on because you were locked in a library or working till midnight or shooting in the gym, no one's posting that. No one's posting bloodshot eyes at 1 a.m. still studying, right? Like that's real. And at the table, we've earned the right now to live a better life. And I think that gets so missed, that in the decades that took for all of us to build something that, I think a millennial, and I hate to generalize, but there is an effect of it can come quick, and it can come because of aesthetics, or it can come because of, some shiny idea. And that is the furthest from the truth. It takes work, and there is no substitute for getting up, getting after it, go to sleep, you do it again, and you do it again. And then years go by, years. And you say, wow, like I have the bruises to prove it and the scars to prove it, but no one can take it away from you at that point, and you've earned it. So no substitute for hard work.
Love that. Somesh.
I think these guys got me thinking. We've moved as a society from one where our community centers, our churches, our temples, our mosques provided the safe haven to help families through these difficult times, to one in which the role of church religion is very different than it was for our parents' generation. And the reality is, being a hero is not just being able to buy a nice car or get a degree or become a leader in an organization. It's also preventing someone from being abused physically. It's also preventing someone from taking their own life. It's also preventing someone from being beaten down in the streets for no fault of their own. And those are the unsung heroes that actually should be celebrated in society, not those that can simply buy the biggest house and show it off to their friends. We need to get back to doing more of that and celebrating the common goodness that we all have within us, but has somehow gotten pushed to the side through social media and other platforms. Mental health is a real issue. It is an issue in the Black community. It's an issue in all the brown communities. It is still culturally taboo to talk about anxiety and depression. One of the things I've spent a lot of my energy on the last 3 years is investing in for-profit companies trying to solve this through health plans and through partnerships with organizations. And I would just say for everybody feeling anxious right now, it's okay to get help. It's okay to talk. It's okay to build bridges, so that you're not alone, because too many lives have been lost by young people who've committed suicide and gone through depression. Too much abuse is happening right now inside the home. And as much as we don't want to lose focus on the issues going on right now in society, we also need to talk about what's been unsaid for decades.
Love it. Love it.
Amen.
Amen. Amen to everything you all have said. I mean, for me, I would say I never really like to talk at the beginning because I really like to listen. And, one, just thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your advice, your mentorship. I would say in recap, right? Like, this is America, right? Look at these windows. Look at the people who are watching, right? This is the America that I know, right? And when we talk about how can we create that America, it's macroeconomics to microeconomics. It's community economics, right? But it's more importantly an understanding and a celebration of who we are, right? And holding ourselves, right, accountable for being great people, right? For being hard workers, right? For being people who reach back and pay it forward and pay it back. And also people who are creating and writing those narratives. So, I don't want to stay too long. I want to thank you all. I think that, for our generation, this is our moment, right? We have been pioneers. If I look at each one of these screens, I see a pioneer. I see a first generation of, right? I've seen someone who had to break through, right? And now we're at a certain point in our careers that, it only makes sense that we continue to do this. We continue to rally and come up with solutions. And so I'd like to thank you guys I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this. And also for everybody who's listening, action items is go out, hold yourself accountable for one, hold the people in the government and your officials accountable, right? But do the work, put in the hard work, pay it back, pay it forward. Look for these people in these panels, in these windows. And we want to support everything that you all are doing. I thank you. Everybody have a great night. This is Business Inside the Game. I'm your host, BD. Thank you, Chelsea Crowder. Thank you, Carlos Castro, Somesh Dash, and the one and only Boris Kodjoe. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thanks, BD. Love you, man.
Thank you, Baron.
Thanks, babe.
Good night.